transaction.
Mr. President, I want to compliment the Senator from Nebraska for his leadership on this issue. He has done a great job of advocating on behalf of small businesses, farmers, ranchers, people all across this country are going to be impacted by this onerous provision in the health care bill. My fear is this is something we're going to be doing, a pattern we're going to be repeating quite frequently in the years ahead as more and more Americans find out what was actually in the Democrats' health care bill. But this particular provision really is egregious because it requires various entities to send their suppliers 1099 forms if they engage in business-to-business transactions that total more than $600 in a single year. And let me just say, Mr. President, that I believe that everyone ought to pay their fair share of taxes. But I'm concerned that the burdens of compliance falls not on the tax delinquents, but instead on the countless businesses, churches, local governments, and nonprofits who pay their taxes on time and in full, or may not even have a tax liability to start with. This means that these entities will have less time to fulfill their core missions, whether that's building products, ministering to the poor, helping students learn, or building local infrastructure. Instead, they're going to be filling out form after form to be compliant with this measure. Because of the heavy compliance costs associated with this measure, its repeal is supported by a wide variety of business organizations and agricultural organizations across the country. And those include the Chamber of Commerce, the National Federation of Independent Business, the American Farm Bureau, to name a few. However, let me just say that it's not just national organizations that I've heard from. In numerous constituent meetings across my state of South Dakota, I've heard from the citizens of South Dakota, whether they be farmers, ranchers, small businesses, CPAs, and others, about the effect that this measure would have on them, on their businesses, and on their employees. Now, while this requirement is not set to take effect until next year, I believe it's important that we act now to give these types of entities certainty that they will not have to take steps to comply with this measure. And I would add, Mr. President, that our government now has a debt that is approaching $14 trillion, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that that debt does not increase, because it's a debt that we continue to pile more and more on and hand to the next generation of Americans. And because of that concern, I'm also very pleased that this amendment is fully offset by rescinding unspent federal funds. The Senator of Nebraska has come up with a way through rescinding unspent federal funds to offset this amendment in a common-sense way. Of course, it accepts Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, which protect both our national security and our national security interests and those who serve our country. But I believe that the rescissions that he calls for in unspent federal funds are a good way to make sure that this doesn't add to our debt. This amendment perfectly captures that belief. I think it's a belief that's shared by many of my colleagues here, I hope at least in the Senate, and by citizens all across this country, that we need to be focused on bringing down our debt, and that we start doing that by limiting government spending, not with putting new burdensome requirements on businesses and charities. Unfortunately, there were numerous other provisions in the health care bill and other bills approved by Congress in the past 2 years which shifted the burden onto small businesses and employers. We will have to revisit, as I said earlier, each of those to ensure that they don't slow economic growth and job creation, which is the thing that the American people want us to be singularly focused on right now. And so I hope we can take this first step today, Mr. President, and support the Senator from Nebraska's amendment, the Johanns amendment, which does address this critical issue, this egregious provision in the health care bill that puts this new costly burden on our small businesses, but doing it in a way that is fiscally responsible, that doesn't add to the debt, that doesn't saddle and burden future generations with more and more debt. And I think that the Senator from Nebraska has come up with a great solution, and I would hope that colleagues here on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats who have heard, like I have from their constituents back home, will take this very common sense amendment and pass it out of here with a big margin, and let's get this particular provision in the health care bill repealed and the negative impact that it would have on economic growth and job creation in this country. Mr. President, with that I yield the balance of my time.